Another video about traveling? You bet! And this time, we're discussing the spin move. Next, on Rule Review. Hello, and thanks for coming back to another segment of Rule Review. First off, some shout outs to those of you who have sent in donations to help support this channel. Thank you for your contributions and constant support in what we are trying to do here at the Officials Institute. Remember, you too can show your support by making a donation using the link above. The NFHS has labeled traveling for the second basketball season in a row, and for this 21-22 season, the National Federation has specifically called out 3 specific traveling situations. This video will cover the rule that governs the increasingly popular spin move. The best way to get this difficult rule right is to stop relying on what looks normal and instead focus on the pivot foot. If you can properly identify when a moving player establishes a pivot, everything else should fall right into place. So let's get right to it and pivot the conversation into some video on spin moves. Roll those clips. We start our series of videos with a post player taking a dribble and then spinning around his defender on his pivot foot to put in an easy 2 points. Great move, right? Well, actually, if we break down the play and look at each component of this move, we first have to determine where the player caught the ball, which appears to have happened here, as both hands are firmly holding the ball. Next up is identifying how many feet are touching the floor, and in this particular play, only his left foot is on the floor. Since the player continues to step onto his other foot, his first foot becomes the pivot, and more importantly, changes this player's moving status to stopped. This is important because after a player has come to a stop and established a pivot foot, the rules book is very clear on what can happen. In this play, he decides to lift his pivot foot, which is legal and should not be ruled a violation. And it's important to note that this is the case in every situation. It is always legal to lift the pivot foot. Always. The action a player makes after the pivot is lifted is what is used in deciding whether a traveling violation has occurred or not. So returning to our clip, we see that after lifting his pivot foot, he returns it to the floor before jumping and releasing the ball on a try. Referencing the rules book, it states, the pivot foot may be lifted but not returned to the floor before the ball is released on a pass or a try for goal. So, as soon as the lifted foot returns to the floor, if the ball is still in the hands of the player, it is a traveling violation. Let's rewatch that play one more time. In our next example, we watch a player dribble toward the lane, but then stops and changes direction, spinning around his opponent, only to have the score waved off by the center official with a traveling violation. Let's zoom in and take a look. We start once again where we should always start on any traveling play. When did the player catch the ball? Looks like he's holding the ball pretty good here, so we'll use this point to find the pivot. As you see, this player doesn't actually step on the other foot, but does more of a hop. But since the rules only describe 2 options, a jump or a step, it would be safe to judge that this move is more of a step than a jump. So with that said, this stepping action establishes the left foot as the pivot. Continuing on, we see this player pick his pivot foot up off the ground, legally, and steps toward the basket, also legally. But as soon as he places his pivot foot back onto the floor, while still holding the ball, he has committed a traveling violation. Let's replay that again in real time. The next clip shows a player outside the 3 receive a pass, drive down the lane, and spin around his defender to finish with a layup, with a whistle by the trail official. But was this traveling or just a layup that got blocked? Following the dribbler into the lane, we see the ball is caught and held here, with 1 foot on the ground. And as he spins around his defender, completes his move with a normal-looking layup, taking the usual 1-2 stepping rhythm allowed in a layup situation. But just because he ends with a move that looks very much like a layup does not automatically make it legal. As this player steps around his defender onto his other foot, it officially establishes a pivot. And when he picks this pivot up and returns it to the floor before releasing the ball for his layup attempt, the move turns into a traveling violation and correctly called by the trail official. Go ahead and watch that one again. In our last video, we see another moving player with another spin move, ending with another shot attempt. Based on the last 3 videos, we've clearly established these types of spin moves are all traveling violations, right? Not so fast. Let's zoom in and see what happened. As always, we start with the moment the player catches the ball, here, and identify only 1 foot is on the floor. Watching the player spin and step onto the other foot, we confirm the right foot as the pivot foot. So far, everything is legal and proceeding as all the other moves. But if you watch closely, you can see this player legally steps toward the basket with his pivot foot, but never puts it back down, and releases the ball with the pivot still in the air. And because of that, this spin move is legal. Go ahead and watch that one again. And that is our traveling rule coverage on the spin move. Just remember, even though most spin moves performed by players these days are illegal, it is never illegal because the pivot is lifted or because the pivot is moving forward in a stepping action. These spin moves become illegal when a player returns that pivot foot to the floor. So knowing when the pivot is established becomes your greatest ally when ruling in these fast-moving plays. Until we see you again, have a good game. Hey, you made it to the end of this video, which means it's time to hit those like, subscribe, and share buttons. Also, please consider making a donation and help keep this channel running with the best basketball rules video training anywhere. I'll see you in the next one.